I still remember that cold November evening in Boston, Massachusetts, when the air outside smelled like roasted chestnuts and winter rain. The Thanksgiving table inside our house on Maplewood Street was filled with laughter, except none of it was for me. My mother, Linda, was moving around the table in her favorite navy blue dress, pouring wine into glasses and smiling proudly as if she were hosting the most perfect family in America. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, his tie slightly loosened after a long day, his face glowing under the chandelier. Across from me sat my sister Sophie, her blonde curls falling perfectly over her shoulders, the golden child of the Mitchell family, the one who could do no wrong. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, but that night it felt like Judgment Day. My parents had invited not just family but also close friends and neighbors from Beacon Hill, people who loved to gossip about success and wealth. The entire dining room was filled with the smell of roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and apple pie, but I couldn't taste a thing. I sat quietly, trying to blend into the background, but I should have known that peace never lasted long in my parents' house. My mother cleared her throat, tapped her glass, and with a voice full of pride said, "Everyone, we have a very special announcement tonight." The room quieted instantly. She looked at Sophie, eyes shining. "Our daughter Sophie has been selected as the new CEO of Sterling Innovations in New York." There was an explosion of applause, cheers, and congratulations. My aunt clapped so hard that her ring hit the wine glass, and my father stood up to hug Sophie, his voice loud and proud. "That's my girl, a CEO at 30. You've made us all proud." I forced a smile, my heart sinking. My fork trembled slightly in my hand. The name Sterling Innovations echoed in my head like a cruel joke. That job, that exact position, was mine. For months, I had worked tirelessly on the business proposal for Sterling Innovations, spending nights awake at my apartment, skipping meals, refining every line of my project until it was flawless. It was my chance to finally prove that I wasn't just Sophie's shadow, but Sophie had somehow stolen it. She had taken my presentation, my designs, and even my words, and handed them in under her name. I had found out only a week earlier, and I had been too stunned, too hurt, to tell anyone. As the table buzzed with excitement, I sat frozen. Sophie looked at me across the table with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't be so quiet, Karen," she said in that sweet, false tone of hers. "You could learn a thing or two from me about confidence." My father laughed, shaking his head. "Karen, maybe you should listen to your sister for once. She's younger than you, yet look where she is. You're 28, still chasing small dreams while she's building empires." The words hit me like cold water. Around me, people nodded, murmuring agreement, as if it was normal for parents to compare their daughters like trophies. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said softly, "That's wonderful, Sophie. Congratulations." But even as I said it, my voice trembled with anger I couldn't hide. My mother frowned, clearly noticing my tone. "Karen, don't ruin this moment with your attitude," she said sharply. "Your sister has achieved something extraordinary, and all you can do is sulk. You should be proud of her, not jealous." Jealous, the word burned inside me. They had never understood me, not once. I worked hard, stayed quiet, earned my degrees with scholarships, while Sophie had lived a life of luxury, funded by my parents' money and protected by their favoritism. Yet somehow I was the disappointment. I stared at my plate, the turkey growing cold. My hands shook, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if I made a scene. "You know," I said finally, my voice louder than I expected, "the Sterling project wasn't even hers. It was mine." She took my proposal, the one I worked on for months, and passed it off as her own. That job was mine. The entire room fell silent. Forks stopped mid-air. My father's face turned red, not with guilt, but with fury. "Don't you dare accuse your sister of something like that," he snapped. "You've always been bitter, Karen, always blaming others for your failures." I looked at my mother, hoping for at least a flicker of understanding, but she crossed her arms. "Enough," she said coldly. "Don't embarrass yourself. You're making excuses again." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Sophie only smiled, tilting her head. "Oh, Karen, you always have such imagination," she said softly, her tone dripping with mock pity. That was the moment something inside me broke. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the wooden floor. You know what? You're right, I said, my voice shaking but strong. I'm done embarrassing myself. I'm done trying to earn your love. You've already chosen your favorite.
Sit down, Karen, my father ordered, his voice rising.
No, I said. Not this time, my mother stood, her expression hard as ice. If you can't respect this family, then you can leave. And I did. I walked upstairs, grabbed my small suitcase, stuffed it with the few things I had, my laptop, a sweater, and the $300 I'd saved from my part-time job. Downstairs, I could still hear their voices, muffled, angry, judgmental. I didn't care anymore. I walked past them, opened the front door, and stepped into the cold November night. The air hit my face like a slap, sharp and clean. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement as snow began to fall softly. I stood there for a long moment, the suitcase handle cold in my hand, staring at the house that had never really been a home. Behind me, through the window, I saw Sophie laughing again, my parents beside her, their silhouettes warm in the light. Then I turned away. I walked toward the bus station, my boots splashing through puddles, my breath fogging the air. For the first time, I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. Somewhere deep down, beneath the ache and the humiliation, I felt something new, freedom. That night, I boarded a night bus to Chicago. I sat by the window, my reflection faint against the darkness outside. I had nothing but my suitcase, my skills, and the stubborn belief that I would rise again, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. As the city lights faded behind me, I whispered quietly, "Someday, you'll know who I really am." And with that, I left Boston and my old life behind forever. When I stepped off the night bus in Chicago, the air felt different, brisk, alive, and full of unfamiliar sounds. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I dragged my small suitcase along the wet pavement. The city lights shimmered off puddles and the hum of traffic mixed with distant jazz from a late-night bar. For the first time in my life, I wasn't anyone's daughter or anyone's sister. I was just Karen Mitchell, a woman with $300, a cracked phone, and the quiet promise that I would start over. I found a small studio apartment in Lincoln Park, a cramped, aging building with peeling paint and a stubborn elevator that never worked. The room had one narrow window overlooking the alley and a radiator that clanged like a broken drum every night. But to me, it felt like freedom. I bought a second-hand desk for $20, placed my old laptop on it, and told myself that this would be the place where everything began again. The first few weeks were hard. I worked double shifts at a small cafe on Clark Street, serving caramel lattes to business people who reminded me of the world I used to belong to. Every night, I came home exhausted, my feet aching and my hands smelling like coffee beans. Yet, I spent hours at my desk afterward, reworking the same project that Sophie had stolen from me. I wanted to rebuild it, not just for revenge, but to reclaim the part of me that believed I could still succeed. Days turned into months, and I lived quietly, almost invisibly. I didn't go out much. I didn't have the money to. My meals were simple, instant noodles, bread, or sometimes a single apple for dinner. But I didn't complain. Every payday, I saved a few dollars, tucking them away in a jar I labeled Future. Slowly, the jar began to fill, first a few hundred, then 1,000, then 5. Each dollar was proof that I was surviving, even when no one believed I could. It was in those long nights that I began to see who I truly was. I realized that success wasn't always about applause or titles. It was about persistence. When I looked into the cracked mirror above my sink, I whispered to myself, "You are not a failure. Karen, you never were." I said it so many times that one day I finally started to believe it. After nearly a year, I found a job at a small tech startup called Bright Labs, located near West Loop. They needed someone who could fix bugs and write code fast. And though I had little experience in big companies, my determination got me through the interview. The salary was modest, $48,000 a year, but to me it was a fortune. I could finally pay rent without fear, buy groceries without counting coins, and even afford a small cup of coffee on my morning walks to work. My boss, Emily Grant, was a woman in her early 30s, sharp, direct, and kind in her own quiet way. She saw potential in me that I had forgotten was there. She once told me, "You've got the kind of mind that doesn't stop until it finds an answer." Don't lose that. Those words stayed with me. At Bright Labs, I worked harder than I ever had before. I arrived early, stayed late, and took every opportunity to learn. Soon, I was leading small projects, fixing system errors that others couldn't solve, and even mentoring new hires. My coworkers often joked that I lived in the office, and maybe I did, but I didn't mind. Work was my therapy, my escape, and my way of building something that no one could take from me again. Still, there were nights when loneliness crept in. I'd walk by the lakefront, watching the lights shimmer across Lake Michigan, and wonder what my parents were doing. Did they ever think about me? Did they regret their words? I didn't know. I tried not to care, but sometimes the silence of my apartment made their absence louder. Then one winter evening, everything changed. I was attending a local tech conference downtown, more out of curiosity than ambition. I wore my one good blazer, the navy one I had bought from a thrift store for $10, and sat quietly in the back row, taking notes. The main speaker, a man named Ethan Wallace, was introduced as the managing director of Aurelia Tech Europe, a leading innovation firm based in London. His talk was about leadership, technology, and how ideas can change lives. But halfway through his presentation, his laptop suddenly froze. The slides disappeared, the room filled with awkward silence, and the event organizer began to panic. Ethan looked mildly embarrassed, apologizing as he fumbled with the controls. Without thinking, I stood up and said, "I can fix it." All eyes turned to me. My heart raced, but I walked to the stage anyway. Ethan stepped aside as I took the laptop, pressed a few keys, and restarted the system. Within minutes, the screen came back to life, the slides reappearing perfectly. The audience clapped, and Ethan smiled at me, genuinely, warmly. "Well," he said into the microphone, "that's what I call quick thinking. Everyone, let's thank the real genius in the room." After the session, he found me in the lobby. "You saved me back there," he said, handing me his business card. "What's your name?" "Karen Mitchell," I replied, still slightly nervous. "Karen," he said thoughtfully, "you've got a gift. I could tell by the way you handled that situation. We're always looking for people like you at Aurelia Tech. Ever thought of working in Europe?" I almost laughed. Europe? Me? The girl who'd once been kicked out of her parents' house and lived off coffee and hope. But his tone was sincere. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I said quietly. "Start by sending me your portfolio," he replied. "Let's see what happens." That night I went home and opened my laptop. My hands trembled as I typed the email, attaching the latest version of my project, the one that had once been stolen but now was entirely mine, rebuilt from the ground up. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked send. A week later I received his reply. "Karen, I've reviewed your work. It's brilliant. We'd like to offer you a position at our headquarters in London. Salary, $120,000 per year. Let me know if you're interested." I stared at the screen, my eyes filling with tears. I had done it. Without my parents, without Sophie, without anyone's approval, I had built something that mattered. That evening I walked to the lakefront again. The wind was cold, but I didn't feel it. I stood there watching the city lights flicker and whispered to the dark water, "You did it, Karen. You really did it." When I got home, I booked a flight to London, paid for with the savings from my future jar, and a heart full of courage. I was leaving America not as a failure, but as a woman reborn. The woman I was always meant to be. And just like that, my story began again, this time, not in the shadow of others, but in the light of my own making. When I first arrived in London, it was raining, not the heavy kind that soaks you to the bone, but the soft drizzle that seems to wash the city clean. I remember stepping out of Heathrow Airport with my single suitcase, looking up at the gray sky and smiling. The air smelled of coffee, wet pavement, and new beginnings. After years of struggle, I had finally stepped into a chapter of my life that was entirely my own. Ethan had arranged for me to stay in a small flat in Chelsea, overlooking a narrow street lined with bookstores and flower shops. The building was old but charming, with ivy climbing up its brick walls and a tiny balcony where I could watch the London mornings unfold. Each day started with the same comforting rhythm, the sound of buses passing by, the smell of bread from the bakery downstairs, and the quiet hum of people heading to work. My first day at Aurelia Tech Europe felt like walking into another world. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls, digital screens, and teams of engineers from all over Europe. Ethan greeted me warmly and introduced me as one of the most brilliant minds we've hired this year. I blushed at his words, but deep down I felt proud. No one had ever introduced me that way before. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's disappointment or second choice. I was exactly where I belonged. The work was challenging but exhilarating. I threw myself into it completely, designing, coding, strategizing late into the night. My colleagues admired my focus. Some even called me the machine. Within months, I was leading a small development team. By the end of my first year, our product had become one of Aurelia Tech's biggest successes. It generated millions in profit, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of financial security. My paycheck was generous, $150,000 a year, but what meant more to me was the respect that came with it. People listened when I spoke. They valued my opinion. 2 years later, I was promoted to head of product development. When Ethan called me into his office to tell me the news, I nearly cried. "You've earned this, Karen," he said simply. "You built your life from the ground up. That's what leadership looks like." I moved out of my Chelsea flat and bought a townhouse in Richmond, a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with oak trees and the air smelled of rain and roses. The house wasn't large, but it was beautiful: cream walls, wooden floors, and big windows that let in the golden morning light. I filled it with things that brought me peace: old books, white candles, soft music, and photographs of the London skyline. Every corner of that house felt like a reward for every night I had spent crying in my tiny Chicago apartment. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the rain tapping gently against the glass. I think about my parents, Linda and Robert, and wonder if they ever thought about me. Did they still believe I was a failure? Did they know how wrong they'd been? I imagined them sitting in their big, empty house back in Boston, with Sophie's laughter gone and their pride turned into silence. I didn't hate them anymore, but I couldn't forgive them either. Some wounds run too deep for apologies. Life in London moved quickly. I traveled often for work: Paris, Berlin, Madrid, cities that glimmered with possibility. I had colleagues who became close friends, and though I kept my personal life private, I sometimes joined them for dinners or drinks. They saw me as strong, independent, unshakable. None of them knew about the Thanksgiving night when I was told I was worthless. I carried that story quietly, not as a wound anymore, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. One autumn morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of fresh coffee. It was a perfect London day, crisp and golden. I sat at my kitchen table, checking emails before heading to work. That's when I saw it, a message from an address I hadn't seen in years. The subject line read, "We need to talk." It was from my father. My hands froze over the keyboard. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I clicked it open. "Dear Karen, I don't know how to start this, except by saying I'm sorry. Things have gone very wrong here. Sophie's company collapsed, and we've lost the house. Your mother and we made mistakes. We were cruel when we should have been kind. We should have believed in you. If you can find it in your heart to forgive us, please call. We just want to hear your voice again. Love, Dad." I read it twice, then 3 times. My chest felt tight, my eyes stung, but not from sadness, from disbelief. The people who once called me a failure were now asking for forgiveness. The sister who had stolen my success had finally fallen, and the parents who had worshipped her were left with nothing. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. The email lingered in my mind, whispering questions I didn't want to answer. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell them how much their words had scarred me, how I had built a life without them, how I no longer needed their approval. But another part of me, the part that had learned strength in silence, wanted to simply delete it and move on. That evening I went for a walk along the Thames River. The sky was painted pink and gold, and the city lights flickered in the water like broken stars. I watched people laughing as they passed by, couples holding hands, children feeding pigeons, and realized that I had something my family never had: peace. I stopped on the bridge, looking out over the river. The wind tugged at my hair, and I closed my eyes. I thought about the girl I used to be, scared, desperate to be loved, and then I thought about the woman I had become, independent, strong, free. When I got home, the email was still there. I hovered over the reply button for a long time. Then, with a slow breath, I selected it and pressed delete. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing but clarity. My parents' apology had come years too late. They weren't seeking forgiveness. They were seeking comfort for their own guilt. But I had outgrown the need to fix their mistakes. I had my own family now, my work, my friends, and the life I had built with my own two hands. That night, as rain began to fall again, I stood by the window of my Richmond townhouse, watching the lights blur through the glass. The city hummed softly around me, steady and alive. I lifted my cup of tea and whispered, "Here's to new beginnings." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running from my past. I was simply living, fully, freely, beautifully, in my present. When I opened the email that night, my hands trembled. The words swam before my eyes as if the past itself was trying to blur into something less painful. My father's name sat at the top of the message, Robert Mitchell, and for a moment I wondered if it was real. Years had passed without a single word from them, and now suddenly there it was, an apology that had come far too late. He wrote that they had lost everything. The house on Maplewood Street was gone, sold to pay off debts. Sophie's company, the one she had stolen from me to build her reputation, had collapsed in scandal. Investors discovered she had falsified documents and lied about her credentials. The press tore her apart, and when the truth surfaced that the original proposal had been mine, the humiliation was complete. My father wrote that Sophie was not doing well, that she'd left Boston and wasn't speaking to anyone. He ended the message with a line that struck like lightning. "We were wrong about you, Karen. You were the strong one all along. Please come home. Your mother and I just want to make things right before it's too late." I stared at the words, my throat tightening. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I simply felt hollow. Because in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need their forgiveness anymore. The part of me that once longed for their love had grown silent long ago. The next morning, I left my townhouse in Richmond and walked to Hyde Park. The London air was crisp, the kind that bites gently at your cheeks and fills your lungs with cold clarity. People strolled past me, joggers, mothers pushing strollers, an old man feeding pigeons. I sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree, the leaves golden and trembling in the wind, and I thought about everything I had endured. The rejection, the loneliness, the countless nights of self-doubt, all of it had shaped me into someone unbreakable. I realized that if I had never been cast out, I might never have found this version of myself, the one who had built a life on her own terms, who didn't need validation to know her worth. My parents had torn me down, but in doing so, they had unknowingly given me the strength to rise. That night, back at home, I opened my laptop and typed a single reply. "I hope you both find peace. Take care." Then I pressed send and closed the computer. I didn't owe them anything more. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself back into work. At Aurelia Tech, our newest project, a sustainable energy platform, was about to launch. The stress was immense, but I thrived under it. Every success, every meeting, every headline with my name on it reminded me that I was no longer the girl who was told she'd never amount to anything. I was Karen Mitchell, head of product development, earning $200,000 a year, leading teams across Europe and America. One Friday afternoon, Ethan stopped by my office. "You've come a long way, Karen," he said with that knowing smile of his. "You should be proud." "I am," I replied, and I meant it. That evening, as I sat at my desk watching the London skyline turn from gold to deep indigo, I made a decision. I transferred $10,000 from my account and donated it to a women's education foundation in Boston, the same city where I had once been told I was a failure. I did it in memory of that girl, the younger version of me who had been silenced but never broken. I didn't do it for recognition or to make a statement. I did it because giving back felt like closing a circle, transforming pain into purpose. A few weeks later, I booked a flight to New York, then a train to Boston. I didn't tell anyone. I needed to see it for myself, the house, the city, the ghosts of my past. When I arrived, it was early winter. The streets were dusted with snow, and the air carried the faint scent of pine and chimney smoke. I took a cab to Maplewood Street, where the house still stood, smaller than I remembered, its white paint peeling, the porch steps worn. But it wasn't ours anymore. The new owners had hung a for sale sign in the yard. Through the window, I could see that the living room was empty, stripped of the memories that once filled it. I stood at the gate, my breath clouding in the air, and for the first time in years I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just peace. The house that had once witnessed my humiliation was now just wood and walls, meaningless and quiet. A woman came out from next door, Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor. Her hair was grayer now, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Karen? Is that you?" she said. "Yes," I replied softly. She shook her head, smiling. "You've changed so much. I heard you made it big in London. I'm so proud of you, dear. Your parents, well, they didn't know what they had." I nodded. "I know," I said simply. We talked for a few minutes, and before I left, she touched my arm and whispered, "You did the right thing, walking away." When she went back inside, I stayed a little longer, standing in front of the old house as snow began to fall. I whispered, "Goodbye." But it wasn't to the house. It was to the part of me that once begged for love I'd never receive. I turned away and walked down the street, my boots crunching softly in the snow. The cold stung my cheeks, but inside I felt warm. I thought about the life waiting for me back in London, my team, my friends, the townhouse in Richmond with its soft lights and quiet peace. That was my home now. That was my family. On the flight back, I watched the city lights fade beneath the clouds. And I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means letting go without bitterness. It means closing a door not out of anger, but because you've finally outgrown what's behind it. When I landed at Heathrow, the rain was falling again. I took a cab back home, watching the city through misted windows. As we crossed the Thames, I saw the lights shimmering in the water. Bright, alive, endless. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, stood by the window, and smiled. My reflection looked calm, strong, content. I had built everything they said I couldn't, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because in the end, I didn't need their apology to know my worth. I had become my own proof. And so, I was Karen Mitchell, successful, independent, and unbroken. Forever.